Okay, in this video, I'm going to show you how to complete the lipid worksheet based on the nutrition report from chronometer.com. And here's my little calculator. So we're going to start with your recommendation for total calorie intake, which goes right here. You can find that information right here in chronometer. I know it's a little bit confusing, but there it is. So my recommended intake is 2,364 calories. My actual intake, average over the 3 days that I did my journal, is 2,004 calories, which you can see right here and also right here. If you see in this list 2003.7, I do not care about 0.7 of a calorie. Go ahead and round that. So I'm going to put 2,004 calories in here. Now to get percentage of the recommendation that I consumed, this is going to tell you whether you met your recommendation, did not meet your recommendation, or exceeded your recommendation. So as a little check on your math, if you are looking at your intake and you see that your intake is less than your recommendation, as I see here, then this percentage here should be less than 100%. And if this number is more than this number, your recommendation, then this number will be more than 100%. So to find this number, their percentage of recommendation consumed, you're always going to divide your intake by your recommendation. So I'm going to divide 2004, oh, hold on, I don't know how that happened, 2004 divided by 2364. And that brings me to 0.8477. Now, to convert that into a percent, you would take that times 100, which brings me to 84.77%. I'm going to round that to 85%. And enter that into my lipid worksheet over here. Now, as we move on to total fat, that becomes a little bit more complicated. Pretty simple to find your total fat intake in grams. I can see that number right here, 102 grams. So that number goes right here. Excuse me. What we're looking for here is your total intake in calories. Now, to get your total intake in calories from grams, we multiply your grams times 9. There's 9 calories per gram of fat. So if we have 102 times 9, that's 918 calories. So that is the number that goes in this box. To get your recommendation in calories is where things get a little bit tricky because we have to do a little bit more math. So as you look at your nutrition report from Chronometer, I see that I consumed 102 grams of fat, which was 111% of my recommendation. That means that 102 is 111% of my goal. So to figure out how to get, or what my goal is, I will divide 102 by 1.11. Because to convert a percent to a decimal, you move the decimal point over 2 places. Whoops. And that will bring me to 91.89. I'm going to round that to 92. So that's 92 grams was my recommendation. Oh, whoops. This is in the wrong spot. 102 grams is what I ate. 92 grams was my recommendation. So now, the way that we figure out how many calories your fat recommendation was is by doing just the same kind of math that we did before. 92 grams of fat times 9 calories per gram is 828 calories from fat was the recommendation. And the percent of the recommendation that you consumed is already calculated for you at here at 111%. So you can fill that in here and here. This is a good time to check your math. If you divide your intake by your recommendation, you should get the same number that's listed in Chronometer. So then we get to calories consumed from nutrient. So this basically is where we're going to figure out if you met the AMDR for fat intake, did not meet the AMDR, or exceeded the AMDR. So you want to know what percentage of your total calorie intake is made up of fats. So to do that, we divide your intake of fat in calories by your intake of total calories. So over here in my calculator, I take 918, that's how many calories from fat I ate on average, divided by 2004, which brings me to 0.458 times 100 equals 45.8, or 46% of calories came from fat. And the AMDR for fat is 25 to 35% of calories, so I did not meet the AMDR. The answer for that would be no. All right, moving on. We can just go ahead and plug these numbers right here. So your intake of total fat calories in this box is going to be the same as this number right here, 918. And then percent of calories consumed from the nutrient, we already did that math in this box. So 46% there. All right, so let's plug in the rest of our numbers from Chronometer. I'm going to scoot this page over. It should be, it's in exactly the same order. So monounsaturated fat, I consumed 40.7 grams. I'm going to go ahead and round that to 41. Polyunsaturated, consumed 18.7 grams. I'm going to go ahead and round that to 19 grams. Omega-3 fats, I consumed 1.8 grams. Since we measure that in such small quantities, I'm not going to round omega-3 fats. Omega-6 fats, I consumed 16.5 grams. Go ahead and add my units there. 30.9 grams of saturated fat. So I'm going to round that to 31. Trans fats, I consumed 0.6 grams. And I consumed 511 grams of cholesterol. Okay, so here's where we go and do some more math. So first of all, since there is no recommendation on Chronometer specifically for monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats, no target, you're just going to go ahead and put in A right there. Just going to make these all the same so that it's nice and organized. Okay, and same with cholesterol. There's no target, so I'm going to write in A, in A. Now I know that it says there's not really a target for saturated fat or trans fat as far as percentages go. So the target that you'll use for saturated fat is less than 10% of total calories. And for trans fats, you'll use less than 1% of total calories as your recommendation. So let's go ahead and figure out our recommended intake for omega-3 fats. So you can see here I consumed 1.8 grams, which was 141% of my recommendation. So to figure out what my recommendation is, I take my intake, 1.8, divided by this percentage, excuse me, which is 1.4, oh, hold on, 1.8 divided by 1.41 equals 1.27. I'm going to round that to 1.3. So my recommendation was 1.3 grams per day. And since we already, can see the percentage, I consumed 141% of my omega-3 goal. I'm going to go ahead and write that in percent of recommendation consumed. All right, let's move on to omega-6 fats. So I consumed 16.5 grams, which is 127% of my goal. So to figure out what my goal was, I take 16.5 divided by 1.27, which brings me to 12.99. I'm going to go ahead and round that to 13. So 13 grams per day was my omega-6 goal. And we already know that I consumed 127% of that goal based on this percentage right here. Okay, saturated fat. So my recommendation should be less than 10% of my total calories. My calorie intake recommendation right up here, 2,364. To figure out what 10% or less of that is, I'm going to take 0.1 times 2,364, which brings me to 236.4. in calories. And then since we're looking at this in grams, we're going to divide this number by 9, which brings you to 26 grams per day or less. Okay, and then trans fat should be less than 1% of total calories. And so what we're looking at, let's see, 0.1 or 0.01 times 2,364 equals 23.64 calories. So if we divide that by 9, then that is 2.6 calories or less. Okay. Then we can do our percentages for here. So to figure out if you consumed more or less than your recommendation, we're looking for just a percentage and those two couple of boxes. If you can't tell, I did not practice this beforehand, so I apologize. Also apologize for that pop-up box. I don't know how to make it stop doing that. If you do and can tell me, I would really appreciate it. Anyway, moving on. So we're going to take our intake divided by your recommendation. So 31 divided by 26. So I consumed 119% of my recommended saturated fat. Since we know that the goal is to be less than 26 grams and I ate 31 grams, we know that this number should be more than 100%. So 119%. All right, so now we're going to look at trans fat. So I consumed 0.6 grams. My recommendation is 2.6 or less. So we get 0.23, move that decimal point over. I consumed 23% of the recommended trans fat for the day. Since we know the recommendation is less than 2.6, I consumed 0.6 grams. We know that that number looks about right. All right, so let's move on to your intake in calories. This is probably the most simple column to fill out. All you're going to do is multiply the numbers in this column, in this column right here, by 9. So 41 grams for monounsaturated fat times 9 is 369 calories. And then when we look at percent of calories from a specific nutrient, we're going to take these numbers divided by your total calorie intake to figure out, since that's one of the ways that we measure fat intake, is as a percentage of total calorie intake. So for monounsaturated fat, I'm going to take 369 and divide that by my total calorie intake for those 3 days, or my total average intake, which was 2,004. I'm going to divide that by 2,004, and that brings me to 0.18 or 18%. Okay, and then polyunsaturated fat, same idea. 19 grams consumed times 9 is 171 grams. 171 calories. And then 171 divided by 2,004 equals 0.085, or if you move the decimal point over, 8.5%. And so on and so forth, all the way down. So that's how you do the math for the lipid intake worksheet. Hopefully I was able to clarify this a little bit and didn't just confuse you more. Please email me if you have any other questions.